Jack Morgan sat alone in the dark control room of the Horizon Reach relay station. The hum of the machines filled the air as the monitors glowed with streams of incoming signals. Most of them were routine messages from other colonies, but one of them was different. It was faint, broken, and repeated over and over, as if whoever sent it had nothing else left but the will to keep sending. He leaned forward and began working the controls. The signal was in a strange code, but Jack was patient. Each sound and pattern told him that it came from far beyond the known trade routes, and from a place few had dared to travel. He tapped the final key, and the message came clear. A voice asking for help. A voice that spoke of fire in the sky, cities under attack, and a kingdom on the edge of falling. Jack stood up and ran from the control room down the long hall to the main council chamber. Queen Evelyn was there, her tall figure wrapped in the royal blue of the Grand Human Alliance. Beside her stood her guards and advisors. The room went silent as Jack stepped forward and gave her the details. The Queen listened without moving, her eyes fixed on Jack. The moment he finished, she asked how far the message had traveled. He told her it had crossed the dark space where no patrols flew. It had passed through storms of radiation and fields of shattered rock. It was a miracle it even reached Horizon Reach. The advisors began to argue. Some said it was too far, some said the risk was too great. Others feared that whoever sent it might already be gone, but Queen Evelyn raised her hand and the room fell quiet. She said, "Humanity. It never turned away from a call for help, and she would not allow it now." Jack felt a fire in his chest. The kind that came only when facing something unknown. The Queen ordered him to form a team. At once, she told him that if Deathworlders were to answer this call, then they would answer with strength and courage. In the hangar bay, the lights reflected off rows of ships. Some built for speed, some built for war. Jack began to search for the right people to join the mission. The first was Claire Rogers, a pilot known for her skill in navigating the most dangerous skies. She was working under the wing of her fighter, checking the fuel lines. When Jack found her, she listened to his words, then nodded and said she was in. The second was Logan Price, a ground commander whose record in battle was matched only by his will to win. Jack found him in the training yard sparring with two younger soldiers. At once, Logan ended the match and stood tall. When he heard the plan, his answer was a firm yes. The team grew with engineers, medics, and scouts, all chosen for their ability to survive and adapt. They worked through the night preparing the main transport ship, loading supplies, checking weapons, and running drills. Queen Evelyn came to the bay before dawn. She walked among them, speaking to each one, not as a ruler to her subjects, but as a leader to her warriors. When the first light of the twin suns touched the horizon, the ship was ready. The great doors of the hangar opened, and the wind swept in, carrying the scent of the city. Below, Jack took his place at the main console. Claire climbed into the pilot's seat, and Logan stood near the hatch, watching the crew as they secured every last crate and strap. The Queen stood on the platform above them. Her voice rang clear across the bay. She said that this mission was not just about saving one world, but about showing the stars that when humanity was called, they would come. They would face danger. They would not break. Jack looked at Claire, then at Logan, and saw in their faces the same fire. He felt the engines roared, the ground shook, and the ship rose into the sky, through the clouds into the black of space. The city of Horizon Reach fell away behind them, until it was just a spark among countless others. They passed the outer patrol lines and entered the uncharted deep. The stars grew brighter and colder. Jack worked at his station, keeping the signal locked so they could follow it through the void days. Passed in long shifts of work and watch, the crew grew silent as they entered a region where even the navigation charts were empty. Then, without warning, the signal grew stronger. It was close. Jack could hear the faint voice again, still calling for help. The crew gathered in the control room, listening. No one spoke. The sound seemed to fill every corner of the ship. Claire adjusted their course, bringing them toward the source of the call. Logan moved to the weapons station, his eyes sharp and ready. Jack felt the weight of the mission press on him, heavier than the dark around them. They were heading into the unknown, where danger waited. But he also felt the pull of that voice, the promise that they could make a difference, that they could be the ones who would stand when no one else would. As the final jump point appeared on their screens, the crew tightened their harnesses. The ship shuddered, and the stars stretched into streaks of light. They were going to see who had sent the call. They were going to show what it meant when Deathworlders came. The ship came out of the jump, and the crew saw a world hanging in the void. It was a deep green and blue sphere, but its skies were streaked with black smoke. Cities burned near the edges of its largest oceans. Fire lines cut across the land like scars. Claire kept the ship steady as they entered the upper atmosphere. Heat wrapped around the hull, and the sound of it echoed through the metal skin. Jack kept his eyes on the signal tracker. It was leading them toward a wide plain where the largest city still stood, or at least what remained of it. Tall towers leaned, broken streets were filled with moving figures and flashes of light from battle. Logan stood at the weapons station. Scanning the ground, he could see the defenders near the center of the city. They were holding a barricade with whatever they could find beyond them. Waves of enemy forces pressed forward, their lines tightening every moment. Jack opened a channel and sent a message down. To the defenders, he told them who they were and that they had come to help. The answer came back quickly, a voice filled with strain and static. He said they could not hold much longer, and the enemy had cut off all escape routes. Queen Evelyn's orders had been clear. They were not here to watch, they were here to fight. Claire took the ship lower, weaving through clouds of smoke. Until they came over the main square, Logan gave the signal to the crew, and the first drop team leaped from the hatch, their armor gleaming in the dim light as they fell toward the ground on their grav lines. Jack and Claire stayed in the ship, providing cover fire from above. The cannons lit up the streets, breaking the enemy advance. For a moment, the defenders below raised their heads and saw the Deathworlders. For the first time, a wave of hope seemed to pass through them. Logan landed at the edge of the barricade. The ground shook under his boots. He moved quickly, meeting the defenders face to face and giving orders. His voice was calm but firm. He split his squad, sending half to reinforce the front line, and the other half to create a path for civilians trapped in nearby buildings. Jack watched from above, marking enemy positions for Logan and his team's. Claire kept the ship in constant motion, dodging incoming fire and striking hard at key points. She spoke little, her focus fixed on keeping the skies clear on the ground. The fighting was close and brutal. Every street corner became a wall to hold or take. Logan pushed forward step by step, his team cutting down the enemy with precision. The defenders fought alongside them, following his lead and matching their pace together. They began to turn the tide. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the wrecked city. The enemy forces pulled back. Regrouping further away, Jack reported the movement to Logan, who ordered the defenders to hold their ground and prepare for another attack. They had won some space, but the battle was far from over. The crew worked through the night, setting up barricades, moving the wounded, and distributing supplies. From the ship, the defenders told them about the first days of the siege, how the enemy had come without warning, and how they had sent the distress signal, hoping someone would hear, but never believing help would arrive. Jack listened quietly, then told them about Horizon Reach, about how Queen Evelyn had made the choice to send them even when others had hesitated. The defenders nodded, some with tears in their eyes. They said they would stand with the Deathworlders until the last. Before dawn, the enemy attacked again. This time with heavier firepower. Claire and Jack were back in the air, the ship roaring through the sky above the city. Logan moved to the front lines. Again rallying both his own soldiers and the defenders, the battle raged through the narrow streets, the sound of weapons and the cries of fighters echoing off the broken walls. When the sun rose, it lit a city that still stood, though much of it lay in ruins. The defenders had not been broken, and neither had the Deathworlders. Jack looked out over the smoking rooftops and felt the weight of the mission more than ever. They were deep in enemy territory, cut off from the grand human alliance, but they had a foothold now, and they had the will to fight. Claire brought the ship down near the main square, where defenders gathered around the wounded. Logan walked through them, speaking to each one, checking on his soldiers and the locals. Alike, Jack joined him and told him the signal source was confirmed to be from the royal district of the city. It meant the call for help had come from someone with great importance. Logan nodded and said they would move there next. The Queen would want them to protect whoever had sent that call. Jack agreed, but he knew it would not be simple. The royal district was deeper in enemy, its territory, and heavily fortified. But if they could take it, they could break the siege for good. As the day went on, they repaired weapons, patched armor, and prepared for the next Move the defenders worked beside them, sharing food and water and quiet words of thanks. The bond between them was growing, forged in the fire of battle and in the shared knowledge that they were fighting for survival. When night fell, the city lay in uneasy silence. The fires still burned in places, and the distant sound of the enemy could be heard beyond the walls. Jack stood on the edge of the square, looking out into the darkness. Somewhere out there was the heart of the siege, and the one who had called for help. They had come this far, and they were not going to turn back now. The dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across the cracked streets. The defenders and the Deathworlders stood ready at the barricade's eyes, fixed on the dark edges of the horizon. The enemy had not yet moved, but all knew it would not stay that way for long. Jack Morgan stood near the command post, reviewing maps and scouting reports. The Royal District lay 2 miles to the east, beyond 3 main streets and a ruined industrial quarter. The enemy controlled all of it, and had fortified every block reaching it would mean. Heavy fighting Logan Price joined him and studied the maps. He pointed to a narrow route that wound through old service tunnels. It could take them under one of the main enemy positions and closer to the district without walking straight into the heaviest defenses. Jack agreed it was risky, but it could give them the edge. They needed Claire. Rogers prepared the ship for air support. Her plan was to fly ahead and clear rooftops and intersections where ambushes might be waiting. She had already marked landing points in case they needed quick extraction or to bring in supplies. During the push before they moved, Logan addressed the defenders and the Deathworlder soldiers. He told them the mission was simple: reach the Royal District, protect whoever had sent the signal, and drive the enemy out of that part of the city. The faces around him were tired but steady. No one backed away. The attack began with the roar of the ship engines. Claire swept over the first street, raining precise fire on enemy barricades. The defenders surged forward behind the Deathworlders, clearing the ground block by block. Jack kept the signal equipment running, tracking their position and marking the safest path ahead. The fighting was close in the industrial quarter. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of heavy machinery still running from broken power lines. Enemies moved between rusted towers and collapsed walkways. Firing from cover, Logan led the front line, moving fast to keep the momentum, his squad taking down targets with sharp bursts of fire. Jack followed with a group of scouts, securing the flanks. They found civilians hiding in storage bays and led them back toward the rear lines where medics waited each time they saved someone. Jack felt the mission grow heavier. It was no longer just about reaching the Royal District. It was about saving every life they could. By midday, they reached the entrance to the service tunnels. It was dark and cold inside, the air filled with dust. Every sound echoed as they moved. The narrow space made it impossible for large squads to travel together, so they advanced in small units, covering each other step by step. Twice they were ambushed by enemy patrols. In the tunnels, the fighting there was harsher. The range so close that every shot felt like it shook. The walls. Logan moved at the point of the formation, cutting through resistance and keeping the path clear behind them. Jack made sure the signal tracking stayed active, even underground, guiding them toward the source. After hours in the tunnels, they emerged into the edge of the Royal District. The contrast was sharp. The buildings here, though damaged, still held traces of their former beauty-carved stone walls, high windows and banners hanging torn but not fallen. The signal was strong. Now only a few blocks away, the enemy knew they had arrived. The streets ahead lit with flashes of fire as barricades came alive. With gunfire, Claire brought the ship down low, striking the nearest heavy weapons and forcing the enemy to scatter. Logan ordered his squads forward. They moved as one line, advancing and covering each other under the roar of the engines above. In the heart of the district, they found a small palace still standing, though marked by scorch and shrapnel. The gates were chained and the walls guarded by a handful of weary soldiers. When they saw the Deathworlders and defenders approach, they opened the gates quickly and waved them inside. Jack met the one who had sent the signal, a woman in regal armor, her voice steady despite the exhaustion on her face. She was the last leader of the city. Still holding out, her guard had been reduced to a fraction of its number. She told them the enemy had been trying to reach her for weeks to end the command and break city. Logan promised they would hold the district. Jack explained that the Grand Human Alliance had heard her call and answered. She nodded in silence for a moment, then asked how long they could stay. He told her they would not leave until the city was free. The rest of the day was spent turning the palace and its surrounding streets into a stronghold. Supplies were brought in from the ship, medical teams treated the wounded, and engineers reinforced walls and built new defenses. The defenders, who had been fighting alone for so long, now fought side by side with the Deathworlders. Mood shifted from desperate survival to determined resistance. As night fell, Jack stood on the palace roof looking out over the district. Fires burned in the distance, but the streets near them were quiet for the first time. Since they had arrived, he knew the enemy would come again, and soon. But now they had something they had not before. They had a united front, and they had hope below him. Logan spoke with the Queen, laying out plans for the next day. Claire was already back in the ship, running patrol flights and watching for enemy movements. Jack breathed in the cool night air and thought about Horizon Reach and the words Queen Evelyn had spoken before they left. They would answer the call, they would face the danger, they would not break. The morning came with the sound of distant fire. The defenders in the Royal District moved quickly to their positions along the walls and barricades. Logan Price stood at the main gate watching the streets. Beyond, they were empty for now, but he knew the enemy was gathering. Jack Morgan worked inside the palace, turning a large hall into a command center. Maps were laid across tables, communication lines linked to scouts and to Claire Rogers in the ship above. Every few minutes, Jack adjusted the markers showing enemy movement. They were spreading along 3 streets, aiming to surround the district. Claire flew low over the rooftops, her eyes scanning every shadow. She saw convoys of enemy troops moving in tight formation and reported their positions to Jack. Her voice stayed calm, but she knew the scale of the attack would test every line they had built before the first wave hit. Logan walked the walls, speaking to each soldier and defender. He told them they were not just holding stone and streets, they were holding the heart of the city. He reminded them that the enemy wanted to break them, but they had already stood through worse. The attack began with a rush of fire along the western street. The defenders answered with a wall of resistance. The noise was deafening. Jack called out targets to Claire, and she struck fast, breaking apart enemy squads before they could bring heavy weapons to bear. Logan directed the ground forces, shifting fighters to the points where pressure grew strongest. For hours, the battle raged. Each time the enemy pulled back, they returned with more strength. The defenders fought without pause, their movements sharp and focused. Beside them, the Deathworlders stood firm, pushing back every attempt to breach the gates. In the middle of the fighting, Jack received a report from a scout. A large enemy unit was moving through the eastern market street, aiming to hit the palace from the side. If they succeeded, the district could fall, Jack told Logan at once, and Logan sent him with a small squad to intercept. The market street was a maze of stalls and broken carts. Shadows stretched long under the rising smoke. Jack moved fast, guiding his squad through narrow alleys. They reached the enemy just as they were setting up weapons. Fire burst around them. Jack led the charge, clearing the street with precise shots. The enemy broke and scattered, leaving the path to the palace secure again. By midday, the battle shifted to the northern side of the district. Claire dove low in her ship, striking enemy positions built on rooftops. Her fire tore through their lines, giving the ground troops a chance to advance. Logan used the opening to push them back to full blocks, retaking ground that had been lost weeks before. The defenders began to cheer between attacks, their voices carrying across the streets. The Queen of the city watched from the palace steps, her expression steady, but her eyes holding pride for the fighters who now stood united. Late in the day, the enemy made one last push with all remaining forces. The western gate shook under the force of their assault. Jack returned from the market and joined Logan on the wall. Together, they held the line, while Claire circled above, firing on any group that tried to flank them. The fight was fierce and close, but the defenders did not break. When the sun began to set, the enemy finally pulled back, leaving behind burning wreckage, and silenced. The defenders stood among the ruins, breathing hard but still standing. The district was safe for now. Jack walked the length of the wall, checking on each fighter and offering what help he could. Logan met with the Queen in the command hall. They spoke of the battle, what it meant. The enemy had lost many, and their morale was shaken. It was the first real victory the city had seen in months. The Queen told them that the people now believed they could win. Claire landed the ship in the main square for repairs. The crew worked quickly, replacing scorched panels and refueling for the next day. She spoke with Jack, quietly telling him the enemy still held the outer city, but their lines were thinner now. They could be broken. They struck hard and fast that night. Fires burned in the distance, but the air inside the district was different. There was a sense of strength, a belief that they could push forward and not just defend. The queen walked among her people, speaking to them and thanking each one who had fought Jack. Watched her move through the crowd and felt the truth of it. They were more than soldiers now. They were a single force. Logan gathered the leaders and laid out the plan for the next step. They would take the fight beyond the district and drive the enemy out of the city street by street. It would be dangerous, and it would cost more lives. But if they waited too long, the enemy would recover. As the night deepened, Jack climbed to the palace roof and looked over the city. The stars shone faintly above the smoke and the broken skyline. In the quiet, he thought of Horizon Reach and of Queen Evelyn's words. They had come to show the stars that when humanity was called, they would answer. They had come to win, and now the city believed it too. The first light of morning touched the city walls, and the defenders stood ready for what was to come. The plan had been set during the night. They would push beyond the royal district and take back the streets one by one, until the enemy was driven out completely. Logan Price led the main column, moving through the western gate with the Deathworlders at the front. The defenders followed close behind, their weapons ready and their steps steady. Jack Morgan stayed near the center with the signal equipment to keep contact with Claire Rogers in the ship above. She was already circling over the outer streets, ready to strike when needed. The first block fell quickly, the enemy taken by surprise at the sudden advance. They tried to regroup further ahead, but Claire broke their lines from the air and Logan pressed forward without pause. Jack directed squads to secure buildings and clear rooftops, making sure no ambush could catch them from behind. As they moved deeper into the city, the fighting grew harder. Every street was a stronghold, and every corner a trap. But the Deathworlders and defenders worked as one, covering each other and pushing forward together. The sound of battle echoed off the walls, but there was no hesitation in their steps. By midday, they had reached the old council square, where the enemy had built a heavy barricade blocking the path to the river district. Logan studied it for a moment, then ordered 2 squads to flank through side streets, while Claire struck from above. The barricade shattered under the combined assault, and the path was open again. The river district was vital. It held the main water supplies and warehouses. If they could secure it, the enemy would lose the resources needed to hold the rest of the city. Jack guided the advance through narrow docks and storehouses, keeping the squads in tight formation. They met strong resistance, but each push drove the enemy further back until the district was theirs. The news spread quickly through the ranks. The morale of the defenders soared. They moved with new energy, taking street after street. The enemy began to break under the relentless pressure. Some fled toward the outer gates, while others surrendered rather than face the Deathworlders again. In the late afternoon, the fighting reached the eastern quarter, the last enemy stronghold in the city. It was a maze of alleys and old stone buildings. The enemy fought fiercely here. Knowing there was nowhere left to run, Logan led the charge himself, moving from cover to cover and clearing the path for the squads behind him. Jack worked closely with him, marking targets for Claire, who flew low to strike at fortified positions. The battle for the eastern quarter lasted until the sun began to set, each building taken after bitter fighting, each street cleared only after the defenders and Deathworlders had given everything they had. At last, the final pocket of resistance was crushed, and the city was free. The silence that followed was deep and heavy, broken only by the sound of boots on stone and the voices of the wounded calling for aid. The people of the city began to emerge from hiding places, some with tears in their eyes as they saw their streets clear for the first time in many weeks. They thanked the fighters who had stood for them, and many spoke the name of Queen Evelyn with respect and gratitude. Jack walked through the square with Claire and Logan at his side. The queen of the city came forward, her armor still marked by the long siege. She thanked them for answering the call when no one else had. She said the city would remember the day the Deathworlders came. Logan replied that the fight had been won together, and that the courage of the defenders had been as strong as any the Deathworlders had brought. Jack added that the Grand Human Alliance would hear of their stand and know it was a victory worth every risk. That night, the fires of battle were replaced by the lights of celebration. The people gathered in the main square, sharing food. In stories, the defenders stood with the Deathworlders as equals and comrades. The queen walked among them, speaking to each person. She passed the bond between the city and the warriors from Horizon Reach was sealed. In that moment, Jack stood on the steps of the palace. Looking out at the crowd, he thought of the first moment He had heard the signal in the quiet of the relay station. He remembered the long journey, the battles, the faces of those they had saved. He knew they had done more than win a city. They had proven what humanity could be when it chose to stand together. Claire joined him, her eyes on the stars above. She said they would need to leave soon. Other calls would come, and the Deathworlders would be needed. Elsewhere, Jack nodded, knowing she was right. Logan approached and told them the crews were already preparing the ship for departure, but they would leave behind supplies and training for the defenders so the city could stand strong on its own. When the morning came, the ship lifted from the main square, the crowd below waving as it rose into the bright sky. The Queen stood at the front, her hand raised in farewell. The city spread out beneath them, scarred but alive, free, because they had come. Jack looked out at the horizon as they left the world behind. He thought of the words Queen Evelyn had spoken before they set out, that they would answer the call, that they would face the danger, and that they would not break. And as the stars closed in around them, he knew those words would guide them to the next signal, wherever it came from.